The gun went off before she could scream. Dust exploded around her feet as rough hands shoved her toward the mud. Laughter, cruel, sharp, cut through the desert air. They weren't going to kill her. That would have been mercy. What they wanted was to watch her crawl, to remind her she was nothing in this godforsaken territory where her kind didn't belong. Then boots hit the ground. Heavy, deliberate. A voice low and edged like broken glass. That's enough. Everything stopped. If you want to see how a stranger became her reason to survive, and she became his, stay until the end. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The town of Broken Ridge wasn't much to look at. A scatter of wooden buildings fighting against the wind, a saloon that never closed, and a general store run by a man who'd shoot you for looking at his daughter wrong. It sat in the cradle of nowhere, too far from civilization to matter, too stubborn to die. People came here to disappear. Some succeeded. Others just faded slower. Jacob Terrell had been fading for 3 years. He didn't talk much. Didn't need to. In a place like Broken Ridge, silence kept you alive longer than words ever could. He worked odd jobs, ranch hand, sometimes security for the supply wagons, sometimes nothing at all. He slept in a room above the livery stable that smelled like manure and rotting wood, and he paid his rent in labor. The owner, a half-blind drunk named Otis, didn't ask questions. That suited Jacob just fine. He had a face people forgot. Not ugly, not handsome, just weathered. Lean in the way men get when they skip meals without noticing. His hands were scarred, knuckles crooked from fights he never talked about. His eyes were pale gray, the kind that looked through you instead of at you. He wore the same clothes every day. A faded shirt, dark trousers held up by a belt with a tarnished buckle, boots so worn the leather had gone soft. His hat was older than most of the buildings in town. Jacob didn't have friends. He had patterns. Every morning, same routine. Coffee at the saloon. Black, no sugar. A glance at the bulletin board for work. Then he'd disappear into the hills or the ranches, doing whatever task paid enough to keep him fed. Evenings, he'd sit outside the livery with a cigarette, watching the sun die over the ridge. He never stayed inside longer than he had to. Walls made him feel trapped. People in Broken Ridge had theories about him. Some said he'd killed a man back east. Others said he'd lost a family. A few swore he was running from the law, though no one had proof. The truth was simpler and worse. Jacob Terrell had stopped caring whether he lived or died, and that made him dangerous in a way most folks couldn't articulate. Then she arrived. It was a Wednesday. Jacob remembered because Wednesdays were when the supply wagon came through, and he'd been hired to help unload. The wagon rolled in just after noon, dust trailing behind it like a funeral shroud. The driver was a man named Calhoun, loud, red-faced, always smelled like whiskey and sweat. He ran a crew of 4, and they worked fast, tossing crates and barrels onto the platform outside the general store. Jacob was hauling a crate of canned goods when he saw her. She was standing near the back of the wagon, half hidden by the cargo. Small frame, dark hair pulled back tight. She wore a plain cotton dress, gray and shapeless, the kind women wore when they'd given up trying to be noticed. Her face was turned down, eyes fixed on the ground. There was something careful about the way she stood, like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. "Hey, China girl, move!" Calhoun's voice cracked through the air like a whip. The woman flinched but didn't look up. "I said move!" Calhoun kicked a crate in her direction. It skidded across the platform, stopping inches from her feet. She stepped aside, quick, mechanical. Her hand stayed folded in front of her. Jacob set down the crate he was carrying. He didn't know why he was paying attention. It wasn't his business. People got pushed around in Broken Ridge every day. Miners, drifters, women, especially women like her. The world wasn't fair, and Jacob had long since stopped pretending otherwise. But something about the way she moved, like she'd been shoved before, like she'd learned not to resist, made his jaw tighten. Calhoun grabbed another crate and tossed it toward her without warning. She twisted out of the way, but the edge caught her shoulder. She stumbled, caught herself against the wagon. "Clumsy bitch," Calhoun muttered. One of the other workers laughed. "What's she even doing here?" "Cooking," Calhoun said. "Owner of the boarding house hired her cheap. Guess nobody else wanted the job." "Can she even speak English?" "Who cares?" Calhoun spat into the dust. Long as she keeps her mouth shut and does what she's told. Jacob's hands curled into fists. He didn't move. Not yet. The woman bent down to pick up something that had fallen from the crate, a small sack of flour. Her fingers were trembling. Calhoun stepped closer, towering over her. You break anything, he said slowly. It comes out of your pay. Understand? She nodded, once, sharp. Say it. Her lips moved. Understand. Her voice was quiet, accented but clear. English, but shaped by another language underneath. Calhoun sneered. Good. Now get the hell out of my way. He shoved her. Not hard enough to knock her down, but hard enough to make his point. She staggered backward, and this time she didn't catch herself. She fell, landing hard on her side in the dirt. The laughter came again, casual, cruel. Jacob didn't think. He just moved. He was across the platform in 3 strides. Calhoun didn't see him coming until Jacob's hand locked around his wrist. Let go, Jacob said. Calhoun's grin faltered. The hell's your problem, Terrell? I said let go. I'm not holding. Jacob's grip tightened. Calhoun winced. You're done pushing her around. The other workers stopped laughing. One of them, a big man with a scar across his nose, took a step forward. You don't want to do this, Terrell. Jacob didn't look at him. His eyes stayed locked on Calhoun. She's just some Chinese whore, Calhoun hissed. Why the hell do you care? Because I'm telling you to stop. Calhoun yanked his wrist free, stumbling back. His face flushed red. You think you're tough? You think you can talk to me like that? Jacob didn't answer. He just stood there, shoulders loose, hands ready. He didn't draw the knife on his belt, but everyone could see it. Calhoun hesitated. For a long moment, the platform was silent except for the wind rattling the wagon's canvas. Then Calhoun spat again, this time at Jacob's feet. You're going to regret this. Maybe. Calhoun jerked his head at his crew. Let's go. We're done here. They climbed back onto the wagon. The driver snapped the reins, and the horses lurched forward. Dust swirled as the wagon rolled away, leaving Jacob standing alone in the street. He turned. The woman was still on the ground. She'd pushed herself up to her knees, but she hadn't stood. Her face was unreadable. No fear, no gratitude, just stillness, like she was waiting to see what he'd do next. Jacob held out his hand. She stared at it. For a second he thought she wouldn't take it. Then slowly she reached up. Her fingers were small and cold against his palm. He pulled her to her feet. You all right? He asked. She didn't answer. Her eyes flicked to his face, then away. She pulled her hand back quickly, brushing dust off her dress. You hurt? No. Her voice was quieter than before. She still wouldn't look at him. Jacob nodded. Good. He picked up his hat. It had fallen when he'd grabbed Calhoun, and set it back on his head. Then he turned to leave. Wait. He stopped. She was looking at him now, really looking. Her eyes were dark, sharp, like she was trying to figure out what kind of man he was. Jacob wondered what she saw. Why did you do that? She asked. Jacob shrugged. Didn't seem right. You don't know me. Doesn't matter. She frowned like she didn't believe him. Men don't help people for no reason. Maybe I'm not most men. Her expression didn't change. Maybe. Jacob waited, but she didn't say anything else. After a moment, he tipped his hat. You should get going. Boarding house is 2 blocks down. Red door. I know where it is. Right. He turned again. This time she didn't stop him. Jacob didn't see her again for 2 days. He didn't think about her much either, or at least he told himself he didn't. But every time he passed the boarding house, his eyes would drift to the windows, half expecting to catch a glimpse of her. He never did. On the 3rd day, he was in the saloon. It was late afternoon, the dead hour between lunch and dinner when the place was mostly empty. Jacob sat at his usual spot near the back, nursing a whiskey he wasn't really drinking. The bartender, a man named Frank who'd lost 3 fingers in a mining accident, was polishing glasses and ignoring him. The door swung open. She walked in. The saloon went quiet. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she did, and just didn't care. She walked straight to the bar, head up, shoulders square. She wore the same gray dress, but her hair was different, still pulled back but looser, a few strands falling around her face. Frank stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for work," she said. Frank blinked. "Work?" "Yes, cooking, cleaning. I can do both." "Lady, this is a saloon." "I know. We don't hire—" Frank caught himself. His eyes flicked around the room like he was checking to see who was listening. "We don't hire women like you." "Women like me," she repeated. Her voice was flat. "You know what I mean." "I know exactly what you mean." She set her hands on the bar. "I can cook better than anyone in this town. I can clean faster. I'll work for half what you'd pay someone else. If you don't believe me, let me prove it." Frank opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I don't think—" "Then don't think. Just say yes or no." Jacob almost smiled. Frank glanced over at him like he was hoping for backup. Jacob just shrugged. Frank sighed. "Fine. 1 week, trial. You mess up, you're gone." "I won't mess up." "We'll see." Frank pointed toward the back. "Kitchen's through there. You start tomorrow, 6 in the morning." She nodded once, then turned to leave. As she passed Jacob's table, her eyes met his. Just for a second. There was no recognition in her face, no acknowledgement of what had happened 3 days ago. But Jacob saw something else, something he recognized. Pride. Her name was May. Jacob learned that a week later when Frank mentioned it in passing. "That May girl, Frank had said, shaking his head. "Damn near took my hand off when I tried to tell her how to season the stew. Acts like she's running the place." Jacob didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. He saw her almost every day now. She worked harder than anyone he'd ever met, up before dawn, still scrubbing pots long after the last drunk had stumbled out. She didn't talk much, didn't smile, kept her head down and her hands busy. But she wasn't invisible. Not to him. He started noticing small things. The way she'd pause sometimes, staring out the window like she was seeing something no one else could. The way her jaw would tighten when men made comments, crude jokes, leering suggestions, and she'd just keep working like she hadn't heard. The way she moved through the saloon like a ghost, always one step ahead of trouble. She never looked at him, never acknowledged him. It was like the incident on the platform had never happened. That should have been fine. Jacob didn't need her gratitude. He didn't need anything from her. But it bothered him anyway. One night, he stayed late. The saloon was nearly empty. Just him, Frank, and a couple of miners passed out in the corner. May was in the kitchen, cleaning up. Jacob could hear the clatter of dishes, the scrape of a brush against iron. He stood, left a coin on the table, and walked to the back. She was bent over the sink, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, hands red from the hot water. She didn't turn when he came in. "You need something?" she asked. "No." She kept scrubbing. "Then why are you here?" "Figured I'd see if you needed help." "I don't." Jacob leaned against the doorframe. "You ever take a break?" "No." "Why not?" "Because if I stop, they'll find a reason to fire me." Jacob frowned. "Frank's not going to fire you. You're the best cook he's ever had." "That doesn't mean anything." She set down the brush, finally turning to face him. Her expression was hard. "You think because you helped me once, I owe you something?" "No." "Then what do you want?" Jacob didn't know how to answer that. He didn't know what he wanted. To talk to her, maybe. To hear her voice when it wasn't clipped and defensive. To figure out why she looked at the world like it was a trap waiting to spring. "I don't want anything," he said finally. She studied him. "I don't believe you." "Believe what you want." She turned back to the sink. "You should go." Jacob didn't move. "What's your story, May?" Her shoulders stiffened. "That's none of your business." "Fair enough." He pushed off the doorframe. "But for what it's worth, you don't have to work yourself to death. Not here. You don't know what I have to do." "Maybe not. But I know what it looks like when someone's running from something." She didn't answer. Jacob waited a moment longer, then left. He didn't talk to her again for a week. The next time they spoke, it wasn't by choice. It was a Friday night. The saloon was packed. Miners, ranch hands, drifters, all of them drunk and loud. Jacob was at his table, trying to ignore the noise. May was moving through the crowd with a tray of food, her face blank, her movements efficient. Then one of the miners grabbed her wrist. "Hey, sweetheart, come sit with me." May pulled back. Let go. The miner grinned. His friends laughed. Don't be like that. I just want to talk. I'm working. So, take a break. He yanked her closer. The tray tipped, plates crashing to the floor. The saloon went quiet. May's voice was ice. Let go! Or what? Jacob was already moving. He crossed the room in seconds, his hand clamping down on the miner's shoulder. She said, let go. The miner looked up, his grin fading. Terrell, this ain't your fight. It is now. She's just... Jacob's grip tightened. Finish that sentence. See what happens. The miner hesitated. Then slowly, he released May's wrist. Whatever. She ain't worth it anyway. Jacob didn't let go. Apologize. What? You heard me. The miner's face flushed. His friends were watching now, waiting to see what he'd do. Finally, he muttered, Sorry. Say it to her. The miner glared at May. Sorry. May didn't respond. She just bent down and started picking up the broken plates. Jacob released the miner and stepped back. The noise in the saloon slowly returned. Jacob walked back to his table, sat down, and picked up his drink like nothing had happened. A few minutes later, May appeared beside him. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know. I can handle myself. I know that too. She set a fresh plate of food in front of him. This is on the house. Jacob looked at the plate, then at her. I didn't do it for free food. I know. She hesitated. But thank you. Before he could respond, she was gone. Jacob stared at the plate for a long time. Then, finally, he started eating. It was the best meal he'd had in years. After that night, things changed. Not all at once, not in any way Jacob could point to and say, there. That's when it started. But little by little, the distance between them began to shrink. May started nodding at him when she passed his table. Sometimes she'd leave an extra biscuit on his plate or pour his coffee without him asking. Jacob started staying later, helping her carry heavy pots or stack chairs when the night was done. They didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. One night, after the saloon had cleared out, May sat down across from him. Jacob looked up, surprised. You finally taking a break? Maybe. She folded her hands on the table. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why do you care? Jacob frowned. About what? About me. About what happens to me. She tilted her head. You don't know me. I'm nothing to you. So why do you keep stepping in? Jacob thought about it. I told you before. It didn't seem right. That's not a real answer. It's the only one I've got. May studied him. You're not like the other men here. That a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know yet. Jacob almost smiled. Fair. She leaned back. You want to know my story, don't you? Only if you want to tell it. May was quiet for a long time. Then slowly she began to speak. I came here 2 years ago, from San Francisco. I had a husband. He worked on the railroads. One day there was an accident. He didn't come home. Her voice was steady, but her hands were trembling. I had nothing. No money, no family. I tried to find work, but no one would hire me. So I came here. I thought maybe it would be different. Is it? May laughed, but there was no humor in it. No. Jacob didn't know what to say, so he just sat there listening. I learned something, May said. In a place like this, you can't be weak. You can't show fear, because the moment you do, they'll destroy you. She looked at him. That's why I don't trust you. Because men like you, men who help for no reason, they always want something eventually. I don't want anything from you, May. Everyone wants something. Not me. She shook her head. You say that now. Jacob met her eyes. I mean it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then May stood. I should go. Jacob nodded. Yeah. She walked to the door, then stopped. Without turning around, she said, Thank you. For listening. Any time. She left. Jacob stayed at the table, staring at the empty chair across from him. He didn't know what he was doing, didn't know where this was going, but for the first time in 3 years, he felt something other than emptiness, and that scared the hell out of him. The days bled into each other after that night. Winter was coming to Broken Ridge. and with it came the kind of cold that settled into your bones and refused to leave. The wind turned mean, cutting through clothing like it had a personal grudge. Jacob started wearing an extra layer under his shirt, and even then he'd wake up some mornings with frost on the inside of his window. May worked through it all. He'd see her in the early mornings, walking to the saloon with her arms wrapped around herself, breath misting in the air. She never complained, never slowed down, but Jacob could see the exhaustion in the way her shoulders slumped when she thought no one was watching. He wanted to say something, offer help maybe, but every time he tried, he'd remember the look in her eyes when she'd told him about her husband, that wall she'd built. It wasn't coming down for anyone, especially not for him. Still, he found himself gravitating toward her. Small things, mostly. He'd make sure there was wood stacked by the saloon's back door before she arrived. He'd fix a broken hinge on the kitchen door that Frank had been ignoring for months. Once, when the temperature dropped so low that the water pump froze, Jacob spent an hour getting it working again just so May wouldn't have to haul buckets from the well. She never thanked him directly, but sometimes he'd find an extra portion of stew waiting at his table, or a cup of coffee that was actually hot instead of lukewarm. It was her way of acknowledging what he did without having to say the words. The other men in town noticed. "You sweet on that Chinese girl?" Frank asked him one afternoon, his tone halfway between curiosity and judgment. Jacob didn't look up from the fence post he was repairing. "No." "Could have fooled me." "Then you're easier to fool than I thought." Frank snorted. "Look, I don't care what you do, but people talk, you know how it is. Let them talk. I'm just saying she's got enough problems without you making it worse." Jacob's hand stilled. He turned to look at Frank, his expression flat. "You think I'm making things worse for her?" Frank shifted uncomfortably. "I'm saying people already don't like her. You keep hanging around, they're going to think, I don't give a damn what they think. Maybe you should." Jacob went back to hammering. The conversation was over. But Frank was right about one thing. People did talk. Jacob heard the whispers when he walked through town, saw the way eyes followed him when he sat at the saloon. Most folks in Broken Ridge minded their own business, but there were always a few who couldn't help themselves. Men who thought they knew better. Men who thought they had a right to an opinion about things that didn't concern them. Calhoun was one of them. Jacob ran into him outside the general store one afternoon. Calhoun was loading supplies onto his wagon, his face red from either exertion or alcohol, probably both. "Well, well," Calhoun said, his voice dripping with mock friendliness. "If it isn't Jacob Terrell, still playing hero?" Jacob ignored him and kept walking. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Jacob stopped. He didn't turn around. "What do you want, Calhoun?" "Just wondering what you see in her, that China girl." Calhoun spat into the dirt. "She must be real talented, huh? That why you're always sniffing around?" Jacob's jaw tightened. He turned slowly. "You got something to say? Say it." Calhoun grinned. "I'm just saying, a man's got needs. And if you're willing to lower yourself to—" Jacob crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and grabbed Calhoun by the front of his shirt. "Finish that sentence, I dare you." Calhoun's grin faltered. "You gonna hit me? Go ahead. Everyone will see what kind of man you really are." Jacob stared at him for a long moment. Then, with deliberate slowness, he released Calhoun's shirt and stepped back. "You're not worth it." "That's what I thought." Calhoun straightened his clothes, trying to regain some dignity. "You know what your problem is, Terrell? You don't know your place, and neither does she." Jacob didn't respond. He just walked away, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles ached. That night, he sat in the saloon longer than usual. The whiskey burned going down, but it didn't do much to settle the anger still simmering in his chest. May brought him his food without a word, setting the plate down and turning to leave. "May," she paused. "What? You ever think about leaving this place?" She turned back, frowning. "Why are you asking me that?" Jacob shrugged. "Just curious." "You want me to leave?" "No, that's not—" He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Forget it." May studied him for a moment, then sat down across from him. "What happened?" "Nothing." "You're a terrible liar." Jacob almost smiled. "Calhoun ran his mouth, that's all." "About me?" "Yeah." May's expression didn't change. "And you're surprised?" "No, but it pisses me off anyway." "Why?" Because he's an idiot. That's not an answer. Jacob met her eyes. Because you don't deserve it. The way people treat you, it's not right. May leaned back in her chair. The world isn't fair, Jacob. You know that as well as I do. Doesn't mean I have to like it. No, but getting angry won't change anything. She folded her arms. I've learned to live with it. You should too. I don't want to live with it. Then what do you want? Jacob didn't have an answer for that. Or maybe he did, but he wasn't ready to say it out loud. May stood. You should go home, get some rest. Yeah, maybe. She walked away, and Jacob sat there alone, staring into his empty glass. The next few weeks were tense. Jacob kept his distance from Calhoun, and Calhoun seemed content to do the same. But the damage was done. The rumors spread, whispered from one person to the next until half the town was convinced Jacob and May were involved in some kind of scandalous affair. It wasn't true, but the truth didn't matter. In a place like Broken Ridge, perception was everything. May handled it the way she handled everything else, by ignoring it. She kept her head down, did her work, and pretended not to notice the stares. But Jacob could see the strain in her face, the way her movements became more mechanical, more guarded. She was retreating back into herself, pulling up the walls she'd barely started to lower. And Jacob didn't know how to stop it. One night, after the saloon had closed, he found her sitting on the back steps. She had her arms wrapped around her knees, staring out at the dark street. Jacob hesitated, then sat down beside her. You all right? He asked. Fine. You're a terrible liar. She glanced at him, and for a second he thought she might smile. But she didn't. I'm tired, Jacob. Of what? Everything. She rested her chin on her knees. Of fighting. Of pretending I don't hear the things people say. Of waking up every day and wondering if this is all there is. Jacob didn't know what to say, so he just sat there, the silence stretching between them. I had a life once, May said quietly, before I came here. I had a home, a husband who loved me. We weren't rich, but we were happy. And then one day, it was all gone. Just like that. She snapped her fingers. And I keep thinking, what was the point? What was the point of any of it if it could just disappear? Jacob looked at her. You can't think like that. Why not? Because it'll eat you alive. May turned to face him. Is that what happened to you? Jacob froze. What? You heard me. Her eyes were sharp, cutting through the dark. You talk about me running from something, but you're running too, I can see it. Jacob looked away. That's different. How? Because I'm not... He stopped, the words catching in his throat. It's just different. Tell me. May... Tell me, Jacob. If you want me to trust you, then trust me first. Jacob was quiet for a long time. Then slowly he started talking. I had a brother, younger than me by 3 years. His name was Daniel. Jacob's voice was rough, like he hadn't said the name out loud in a long time. We grew up in Missouri. Farmland. Nothing special. Our parents died when I was 17, so it was just me and him. I took care of him. Made sure he ate, made sure he didn't get into too much trouble. He was a good kid, smarter than me. He wanted to go to school, become a teacher. Jacob paused, his hands clenching into fists. There was a man in town, rich, owned half the land around us. He wanted our farm, said we owed him money. We didn't. But he had lawyers and we didn't. One night he sent some men to scare us off. I tried to fight them. Daniel tried to help. Jacob's voice cracked. They shot him. Right in front of me. He was 19 years old. May didn't say anything. She just waited. I killed the man who did it, Jacob continued. Tracked him down 2 days later and put a bullet in his chest. Then I ran. Spent the next 3 years moving from town to town, trying to outrun what I'd done. Trying to forget. He looked at May. That's why I'm here. That's why I don't talk to people. Because the last person I cared about died because of me. May's expression softened. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? No, it wasn't. She reached out, her hand hovering over his for a moment before she pulled it back. You were trying to protect him. That's not the same thing. Doesn't change the fact that he's dead. No, but it means you're not the monster you think you are. Jacob didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. They sat there in silence for a while longer, the cold biting at their skin. Then May stood. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me." "Yeah." She walked to the door, then stopped. "Jacob?" "Yeah?" "I don't think you're a bad man." Jacob looked up at her. "What do you think I am?" May smiled faintly. "I think you're someone who's trying. That's more than most people can say." She went inside, leaving Jacob alone in the dark. Winter deepened. The work dried up as the cold made outdoor labor nearly impossible. Jacob found himself with more free time than he knew what to do with. He spent most of it at the saloon, nursing drinks and watching May work. She didn't talk to him much during those weeks, but sometimes, when the saloon was quiet, she'd sit with him for a few minutes. They didn't say much, just sat in companionable silence, two people who'd learned that words weren't always necessary. One afternoon, Jacob was walking past the boarding house when he heard shouting. He stopped, listening. The voice was familiar, Calhoun. "I said pay up." "I don't have it yet." That was Mrs. Kemp, the woman who ran the boarding house. Her voice was shaking. "That's not my problem. You owe me for 3 months of supplies. Either you pay, or I take what's owed." Jacob walked around to the back of the building. Calhoun was standing in the doorway, blocking Mrs. Kemp from leaving. Behind her, Jacob could see May, her face pale. "Get out of my house," Mrs. Kemp said. "Not until I get paid." Jacob stepped forward. She said, "Get out." Calhoun turned, his face twisting into a sneer. "Of course. Here comes the hero again. Leave. Now." "Or what? You gonna hit me this time?" Calhoun crossed his arms. "Go ahead. Give me a reason." Jacob didn't move. He just stared at Calhoun, his expression cold. Calhoun's sneer faltered. "You know what? Forget it. I'll come back when she's got the money. But if she doesn't pay by the end of the week, I'm taking it out of her girl's wages." He jabbed a finger at May. "You understand me?" Mrs. Kemp nodded quickly. "Yes. Yes, I understand." Calhoun shoved past Jacob and disappeared down the street. Jacob turned to Mrs. Kemp. "You all right?" "I'm fine, thank you." She looked exhausted. "I don't know how I'm going to pay him." "How much do you owe?" $30. Jacob winced. That was more than most people in Broken Ridge made in a month. "I'll figure something out," Mrs. Kemp said, though she didn't sound convinced. Jacob glanced at May. She was still standing in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. Her face was unreadable, but Jacob could see the tension in her shoulders. "I'll take care of it," Jacob said. Mrs. Kemp blinked. "What?" "I said I'll take care of it. Give me a few days." "Jacob, you don't have to—" "I know, but I'm going to anyway." Mrs. Kemp looked like she wanted to argue, but she just nodded. "Thank you." Jacob tipped his hat and left. That night, he went to see Frank. "I need work," Jacob said. Frank looked up from the ledger he was scribbling in. "What kind of work?" "Any kind. As much as you've got." Frank frowned. "You in some kind of trouble?" "No, I just need the money." Frank studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, there's a ranch about 10 miles out. They're looking for help fixing their barn, pays $15. "I'll take it." "It's hard work, Terrell. Manual labor. You sure you're up for it?" "I'm sure." "All right, head out tomorrow morning." Jacob spent the next week working himself to the bone. The ranch was brutal. 12-hour days of hauling lumber, hammering nails, and patching holes in the roof. His hands were blistered and bleeding by the 3rd day, and his back ached so badly he could barely stand. But he didn't stop. When the week was over, the rancher paid him in cash. Jacob counted it twice to make sure. $15. Exactly what he needed. He rode back to Broken Ridge and went straight to Mrs. Kemp's boarding house. "Here," he said, handing her the money. "That should cover half." Mrs. Kemp stared at the bills in her hand. "Jacob, this is... Where did you get this?" "Don't worry about it." "I can't take this." "You're not taking it. I'm giving it to you." "But, Mrs. Kemp," Jacob's voice was firm. "Just take it, please." She hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't have to." Jacob turned to leave, but Mrs. Kemp called after him. "May's upstairs, room at the end of the hall, if you want to see her." Jacob paused. Then he climbed the stairs. May's room was small and sparse. A bed, a chair, a dresser. Nothing else. She was sitting on the bed, mending a torn shirt. She looked up when Jacob knocked. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I gave Mrs. Kemp the money she needed." May set down the shirt. "Why?" "Because she needed it." "That's not an answer." Jacob leaned against the doorframe. "I didn't want you to lose your job." May stared at him. "You did this for me?" "Yeah." "Jacob, don't." He held up a hand. "Don't try to talk me out of it. It's done." May stood, crossing the room until she was standing in front of him. She was close enough that Jacob could see the faint scar on her chin, the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. "Why do you keep doing this?" she asked quietly. "Because I care about you." The words hung in the air between them. May's eyes widened. "Jacob, I'm not asking you to feel the same way," Jacob said quickly. I needed you to know." May didn't say anything. She just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then slowly, she reached out and took his hand. Jacob's breath caught. "I don't know what to say," May whispered. "You don't have to say anything." "I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of this. Of you. Of losing someone again." Her voice broke. "I can't go through that again, Jacob. I can't." Jacob squeezed her hand gently. "You won't lose me." "You can't promise that." "No, but I can try." May closed her eyes, and for a moment, Jacob thought she was going to pull away. But then she stepped closer, resting her forehead against his chest. Jacob wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly. They stood like that for a long time, two broken people clinging to each other in the dark. And for the first time in years, Jacob felt like he was home. When Jacob woke the next morning, his first thought was of May. The memory of holding her, of feeling her warmth against him, felt both impossibly distant and achingly close. He lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling of his room above the livery, trying to figure out what happened next. He'd never been good with emotions, never knew what to say when things got complicated. And this, whatever this was between him and May, it was complicated as hell. He got dressed and headed to the saloon. It was early, the sun barely cresting the ridge, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The street was empty except for a stray dog nosing through garbage. Jacob pushed through the saloon's front door and found Frank already behind the bar, looking half asleep. "Coffee's not ready yet," Frank muttered. "I'll wait." Jacob sat at his usual table and tried not to think about the fact that in a few hours, May would walk through that door. He wasn't sure what he'd say to her, wasn't sure if she'd even want to talk to him after last night. Maybe she'd regret it. Maybe she'd pull back into herself again, and all the progress they'd made would disappear like smoke. The door opened. Jacob looked up. It was May. She stopped when she saw him, her hand still on the door. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she walked over to his table and sat down across from him. "You're here early," she said. "So are you." "I couldn't sleep." "Yeah, me neither." They sat in silence for a moment. Frank was making noise in the kitchen, the clatter of pots and pans filling the empty space between them. "About last night," May started. Jacob held up a hand. "You don't have to say anything." "I want to." "All right." May folded her hands on the table. "I meant what I said. I'm scared, but I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of keeping everyone at a distance because I'm afraid of what might happen." She looked at him. "So if you're willing to be patient with me, I'd like to try. Whatever this is, I'd like to try." Jacob felt something loosen in his chest. "Yeah, I'd like that too." May smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. "Good. Good." Frank appeared with 2 cups of coffee, setting them down without a word. He looked between Jacob and May, then shook his head and walked away. "He thinks we're crazy," May said. "Probably. Are we?" Jacob picked up his coffee. "Maybe, but I've done crazier things." They talked for a while after that. Not about anything important, just small things. May told him about a recipe she'd learned from her grandmother. Jacob told her about a horse he'd once owned that had a habit of biting anyone who got too close. It was easy, comfortable, the kind of conversation Jacob hadn't realized he'd been missing. When the saloon started to fill up with the morning crowd, May stood. I should get to work. Yeah. She hesitated, then reached out and touched his hand briefly. Thank you. For everything. Jacob nodded. Anytime. She disappeared into the kitchen, and Jacob sat there nursing his coffee, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The next few weeks were different. Jacob and May didn't hide what was happening between them, but they didn't advertise it either. They spent time together when they could. Late nights after the saloon closed, early mornings before the town woke up. Jacob taught May how to play cards. May taught Jacob a few words in Cantonese, laughing when he butchered the pronunciation. It wasn't perfect. There were moments when May would retreat into herself, when the weight of everything she'd lost would come crashing down and she'd go quiet for days. Jacob learned to recognize those moments, to give her space without pulling away completely. And there were moments when Jacob's own demons caught up with him, when he'd wake up in the middle of the night with his brother's name on his lips and the smell of gunpowder in his nose. May never asked about those moments. She'd just sit with him in the dark until the ghosts faded. But despite the rough patches, something was growing between them, something fragile and new, like the first shoots of grass after a long winter. The town noticed. Of course they did. In a place like Broken Ridge, privacy was a luxury no one could afford. Jacob started getting looks when he walked down the street. Some were curious. Some were disapproving. A few were outright hostile. He ignored them all. May faced worse. The whispers followed her everywhere now. Women crossed the street to avoid her. Men made crude comments just loud enough for her to hear. One afternoon, Jacob found her sitting on the back steps of the saloon, her hands shaking. What happened? He asked. Nothing. May. She looked up at him, and he saw the anger in her eyes. Mrs. Patterson told me I was corrupting you, that I was using you for money, that women like me always do. Jacob's jaw tightened. Mrs. Patterson's a bitter old woman who hasn't smiled in 20 years. Don't listen to her. It's not just her, Jacob. It's everyone. They look at me like I'm dirt, like I don't deserve to be happy. Her voice cracked. Maybe they're right. Jacob sat down beside her. They're not. How do you know? Because I know you, and you're one of the strongest, most decent people I've ever met. What they think doesn't change that. May wiped at her eyes. I wish it were that simple. It is. You're just making it complicated. She laughed bitterly. You sound like my mother. Your mother sounds smart. May looked at him. She died when I was 12. Jacob winced. I'm sorry. I didn't know. How could you? May leaned her head against his shoulder. She used to say that the world is full of people who will try to make you feel small, and the only way to survive is to refuse to shrink. Sounds like good advice. It is. I just forget sometimes. Jacob put his arm around her. Then I'll remind you. They sat there for a while watching the sun set over the ridge. When the cold got too much to bear, they went inside. May went back to work, and Jacob stayed at his table, watching her move through the saloon with that same quiet strength that had caught his attention months ago. He didn't know what the future held, didn't know if they'd make it through the winter, let alone the rest of their lives. But for the first time since his brother died, Jacob felt like he had something worth fighting for. The trouble started on a Tuesday. Jacob was at the livery, helping Otis repair a broken wagon wheel, when a man rode into town. He was tall, well-dressed, with a clean-shaven face and cold eyes. He dismounted in front of the saloon and walked inside like he owned the place. Jacob felt a prickle of unease. Strangers weren't uncommon in Broken Ridge, but there was something about this man that set his teeth on edge. He finished his work and headed to the saloon. The stranger was sitting at the bar, talking to Frank. Jacob couldn't hear what they were saying, but Frank looked uncomfortable. Jacob sat at his usual table and waited. A few minutes later, May came out of the kitchen. She stopped when she saw the stranger, her face going pale. The stranger turned and smiled. May, it's been a long time. May didn't move. What are you doing here, Chen? I came to see you. Is that so surprising? Yes, Chen laughed. Still as blunt as ever, I see. He stood and walked toward her. You look well. Different, but well. I asked you a question. What do you want? Chen's smile faded. We need to talk, in private. No. May, I said no. Chen's eyes narrowed. You don't get to dismiss me. Not after everything. Jacob stood. She said no. Chen turned, looking Jacob up and down. And who are you? Someone telling you to leave. Chen's smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. I see. You found yourself a protector. How quaint. May stepped between them. Jacob, don't. Who is this guy? Jacob asked. May hesitated. He's my husband's brother. Jacob felt like he'd been punched in the gut. What? Chen crossed his arms. Did she not tell you? How interesting. Get out, May said, her voice shaking. Get out now, or I'll have the sheriff throw you out. Chen raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, I'll go. But we're not done, May. You owe me a conversation. He looked at Jacob. And you should ask her about the money. What money? Jacob demanded. Chen just smiled and walked out. The saloon was dead silent. Everyone was staring. May turned and walked back into the kitchen without a word. Jacob followed her. She was standing at the sink, her hands gripping the edge so hard her knuckles were white. May, don't. We need to talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. Jacob moved closer. He said you owe him. What did he mean? May spun around. It's none of your business. What the hell it's not. If someone's coming after you, he's not coming after me. He just wants money. What money? May closed her eyes. When my husband died, his family blamed me. They said it was my fault he was working on the railroads, that if I hadn't pushed him to take the job, he'd still be alive. They demanded compensation, money I didn't have. So I ran. Jacob stared at her. You ran from your husband's family? Yes. How much do you owe them? $200. Jacob whistled. That's a lot of money. I know. Why didn't you tell me? Because it's my problem, Jacob, not yours. Everything about you is my problem now. May looked at him, her eyes wet. You don't understand. Chen's not like the people here. He's dangerous. If he thinks you're helping me, he'll hurt you. Let him try. Jacob, I'm not going anywhere, May. You hear me? I don't care who he is or what he wants. I'm not leaving you. May covered her face with her hands. I don't know what to do. Jacob pulled her into his arms. We'll figure it out. Together. She clung to him, and Jacob held her tight, wishing he could promise her that everything would be all right. But he couldn't, because the truth was, he had no idea how they were going to get out of this. Chen stayed in town. He rented a room at the boarding house, and every day Jacob would see him walking the streets, watching, waiting. May refused to talk to him. Jacob made sure of that. Whenever Chen showed up at the saloon, Jacob would be there, standing between him and May like a wall. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Chen said one afternoon. Good, Chen sighed. You don't know what you're getting into, friend. I'm not your friend. No, but you could be. Chen leaned against the bar. Look, I don't want trouble. I just want what's owed to my family. May knows this. She's being stubborn. She doesn't owe you anything. That's not for you to decide. Jacob stepped closer. It is now. Chen studied him for a long moment. You care about her? Yeah. Enough to die for her? Jacob didn't blink. If it comes to that, Chen laughed. You're either very brave or very stupid. Maybe both. Chen's smile faded. I'll give you 1 week. If May doesn't pay by then, I'll take what I'm owed, and I won't be gentle about it. Try it, see what happens. Chen walked out, and Jacob stood there, his heart pounding. That night, Jacob sat down with May and went through her options. None of them were good. I don't have $200, May said. I barely have 20. Then we'll find a way to get it. How? Jacob thought for a moment. I could work, take on extra jobs, save every penny. That would take months. Chen's not going to wait that long. Then we leave. May looked at him. What? We leave town. Tonight. Just pack what we can carry and go. Jacob, we can't just, why not? There's nothing keeping us here. We could go west, find a new town, start over. May shook her head. Chen would find us. He has connections. People who owe him favors. We wouldn't make it a week. So what do you want to do? May was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I want to fight. Jacob blinked. What? I'm tired of running. I've been running my whole life, from poverty, from grief, from people like Chen, and I'm done. She looked at him. If he wants a fight, I'll give him one. Jacob felt a surge of pride. All right, then we fight. But how? Jacob thought about it. Chen's bluffing. He's trying to scare you into giving him money. But if we call his bluff, if we stand our ground, he'll back down. You don't know that. No. But I know men like him. They're bullies, and bullies fold when you hit back. May didn't look convinced, but she nodded. All right, we'll try it your way. The next day, Jacob went to see the sheriff. Sheriff Dawson was a fat, lazy man who spent most of his time sleeping in his office. But he was the law in Broken Ridge, and Jacob figured it was worth a shot. What do you want, Terrell? Dawson asked, not looking up from his newspaper. There's a man in town. Chen. He's threatening a friend of mine. Threatening how? Trying to extort money from her. Dawson yawned. That's not illegal. It is if he's using intimidation. Has he hurt anyone? Not yet. Then I can't do anything. Jacob's jaw tightened. You're the sheriff. You're supposed to protect people. Dawson finally looked up. I protect people who pay taxes, Terrell. Your Chinese girlfriend doesn't qualify. Jacob wanted to punch him. Instead, he turned and walked out. When he got back to the saloon, May was waiting. What did he say? She asked. He's useless. May sighed. I figured. We're on our own. We always were. That night, Chen made his move. Jacob was walking May back to the boarding house when Chen stepped out of the shadows, flanked by two men Jacob didn't recognize. They were big, rough-looking, the kind of men you hired when you wanted someone hurt. Evening, Chen said pleasantly. I thought we could have that conversation now. Jacob moved in front of May. Walk away, Chen. Or what? You'll fight all three of us? Chen laughed. Be realistic. I'm warning you. And I'm warning you. Chen's smile disappeared. Last chance, May. Pay what you owe, or things get ugly. May stepped forward. I don't owe you anything. Your brother died because of an accident, not because of me. That's not what our family thinks. I don't care what your family thinks. Chen's eyes narrowed. Fine. Have it your way. He nodded to the two men. They moved forward. Jacob didn't hesitate. He swung at the first man, his fist connecting with the guy's jaw. The man stumbled back, surprised. The second man grabbed Jacob from behind, pinning his arms. Jacob twisted, driving his elbow into the man's ribs. The grip loosened. Jacob spun and kicked, catching the man in the knee. He went down with a grunt. The first man recovered and charged. Jacob sidestepped, but not fast enough. The man's fist caught him in the temple. Stars exploded across Jacob's vision. He stumbled, barely keeping his feet. Jacob! May's voice cut through the fog. Jacob shook his head, trying to clear it. The first man was coming at him again. Jacob ducked under the punch and drove his fist into the man's gut. The man doubled over, gasping. The second man was back up. He pulled a knife. Jacob froze. Chen stepped forward. Enough. We're not killing anyone tonight. He looked at May. But this isn't over. You have 3 days. After that, I take what I'm owed, one way or another. He and his men disappeared into the dark. Jacob collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. His head was throbbing, and he could taste blood. May knelt beside him. Are you all right? Yeah, I think so. You're bleeding. I'll be fine. Jacob touched his forehead and winced. Just a scratch. May helped him to his feet. You shouldn't have done that. What was I supposed to do? Let them take you? You could have been killed. So could you. May looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Why do you keep doing this? Why do you keep putting yourself in danger for me? Jacob cupped her face in his hands. Because I love you. The words hung in the air between them. May's breath hitched. Jacob, I love you, May, and I'll keep fighting for you as long as I have breath in my body. May kissed him, hard, desperate, like she was trying to hold on to something slipping through her fingers. When they pulled apart, she whispered, I love you too. Jacob rested his forehead against hers. Then we'll get through this. Together. Promise? Promise. But even as he said it, Jacob wasn't sure he believed it. The next 3 days were the longest of Jacob's life. He and May barely slept. They stayed at the boarding house, barricading the door at night and jumping at every sound. Jacob kept his knife within reach at all times. On the 3rd day, Jacob made a decision. He went to see Frank. "I need a favor," Jacob said. Frank looked up from the bar. "What kind of favor?" "I need to borrow $200. Frank laughed. "You're joking." "I'm not." "Jacob, I don't have that kind of money." "Yes, you do. I've seen your ledger." Frank's expression hardened. "Even if I did, why would I lend it to you?" "Because I'm asking." "That's not a reason." Jacob leaned on the bar. "Frank, I've worked for you for 3 years. I've never asked you for anything. I'm asking now, please." Frank stared at him. "This is about that girl, isn't it? Her name is May." "Jacob, you're making a mistake. She's not worth it." Jacob's hand shot out, grabbing Frank by the collar. Don't you dare." Frank's eyes widened. All right. Let go." Jacob released him, stepping back. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "Forget it." Frank straightened his shirt. "I can't give you $200, but I can give you 50. That's all I can spare." Jacob nodded. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You still need another 150. Jacob left the saloon and spent the rest of the day trying to scrape together the rest. He sold his gun, his saddle, even the watch his father had given him. By the end of the day, he had $180. It wasn't enough, but it was close. That night, Chen came to collect. Jacob and May were waiting outside the saloon. Chen arrived alone this time, his hands in his pockets, looking relaxed. "Well," he said, "do you have it?" Jacob held out the money. 180. Chen counted it slowly. "This is short. It's all we have." Chen looked at May. "Not good enough." "It'll have to be," Jacob said. Chen smiled. "Or I could just take her instead." Jacob stepped in front of May. "Over my dead body." "That can be arranged." Jacob's hand went to his knife, but before he could draw it, a voice rang out from the darkness. "Drop the knife, Terrell." Jacob turned. Sheriff Dawson was standing in the street, his gun drawn. "What the hell are you doing?" Jacob demanded. "My job," Dawson said. "Chen here filed a complaint, says you owe him money, says you've been threatening him." "That's a lie. Doesn't matter, he's got the law on his side." Dawson gestured with his gun. "Now step away from the girl." Jacob didn't move. "No." "Don't make this harder than it has to be." "Go to hell." Dawson cocked the hammer. "Last warning." May grabbed Jacob's arm. "Don't, please." Jacob looked at her, saw the fear in her eyes, and he knew he'd lost. He stepped aside. Chen walked over to May and grabbed her wrist. "You're coming with me." May didn't resist. She just looked at Jacob, her eyes pleading. Jacob's hands clenched into fists. "If you hurt her—" "You'll what?" Chen pulled May toward the street. "You've got nothing, Terrell. No money, no gun, no power. You're nothing." Jacob watched helplessly as Chen dragged May away. Dawson kept his gun trained on Jacob until they were out of sight. Then he holstered it and walked away without a word. Jacob stood there in the street, alone, his world collapsing around him. He'd failed her. He'd promised to protect her, and he'd failed. Jacob sank to his knees, the weight of it crushing him. And for the first time since his brother died, Jacob Terrell cried. Dawn came too fast. Jacob woke to the sound of horses outside and the low murmur of men's voices. He'd barely slept, spending most of the night staring at May's face in the dim light, trying to memorize every detail. The curve of her cheek, the way her hair fell across the pillow, the small scar on her chin she'd never explained. He dressed quietly, careful not to wake her. But as he reached for his coat, her hand caught his wrist. "You're leaving," she said. Not a question. "Yeah, well..." She sat up, the blanket falling to her waist. "I'm going with you." "No." "Jacob." "May, this isn't up for discussion. You're staying here where it's safe." Her eyes flashed. "Safe? You think Broken Ridge is safe? If you don't come back, Garrett will come for me anyway." "I'll come back." "You can't promise that." Jacob knelt beside the bed, taking both her hands in his. "Listen to me. If something goes wrong, if I don't make it back, I need you to run. Take whatever money we've saved and go. Go east, go west, I don't care. Just get as far from here as possible. I'm not leaving without you. May, no. Her voice broke. I already lost one person I loved. I won't survive losing another. Jacob's throat tightened. You'll survive. You're stronger than you think. That's not the point. He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. Soap and smoke and something uniquely her. I know, but I need you to promise me anyway. May was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded against his chest. All right, I promise. Jacob kissed the top of her head. I'll be back in 3 days, 4 at most. You better be. He stood, grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the wall, and headed for the door. At the threshold, he stopped and looked back. May was watching him, her face pale in the early morning light. I love you, he said. I love you too. Then he was gone. Monroe was waiting outside with 2 other men. One was young, maybe 20, with nervous eyes and hands that wouldn't stop fidgeting. The other was older, built like a barrel, with a scar that ran from his ear to his collarbone. This is Daniels, Monroe said, gesturing to the young one. And that's Hayes. Hayes nodded. Daniels just stared at Jacob like he was trying to decide if he could be trusted. We ready? Jacob asked. Soon as you are. They rode out of Broken Ridge as the sun broke over the horizon. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, all rocks and scrub brush. The kind of terrain that could kill you if you weren't careful. They traveled in silence for the first few hours, each man lost in his own thoughts. It was Hayes who finally spoke. You done this kind of thing before? Jacob glanced at him. What kind of thing? Hunting men. Jacob thought about the man he'd killed back in Missouri, the way the body had fallen, the blood spreading across the dirt. Once. How'd that go? Not well. Hayes grunted. Honest. I like that. They made camp that night in a shallow canyon. Monroe built a fire while Daniels tended to the horses. Jacob sat on a rock, checking his rifle. Hayes settled beside him. Monroe says you're doing this for money, Hayes said. That's right. Must be important. Jacob didn't answer. Hayes pulled out a flask and took a long drink. I got a daughter. Back in Denver. She's sick. Needs medicine I can't afford. That's why I'm here. Jacob looked at him. What about Daniels? Hayes glanced over at the young man. Gambling debt. Got in over his head with the wrong people. Figures this'll get them off his back. And Monroe? Hayes shrugged. Monroe just likes the work. Jacob filed that information away. It was always good to know what motivated the men you were riding with. They found the gang's trail the next afternoon, fresh tracks leading deeper into the hills. Monroe dismounted and studied the ground. 3 of them, he said. Maybe 4, heading northeast. How far ahead? Jacob asked. 6 hours, maybe less. Monroe stood, brushing dirt from his hands. We can catch them by nightfall if we push hard. They pushed hard. The sun was setting when they spotted the smoke, a thin column rising from behind a ridge about a mile ahead. Monroe signaled for them to dismount. They tied the horses to a cluster of scraggly trees and continued on foot. The gang's camp was in a small clearing, protected on 3 sides by rock formations. 4 men sat around a fire, passing a bottle between them. Their horses were tethered nearby, along with 2 pack mules loaded with supplies. Monroe crouched behind a boulder. We hit them fast and hard, no warning. That's murder, Daniels whispered. Monroe turned to look at him. That's the job. You got a problem with it. You can wait here. Daniels swallowed hard but shook his head. Jacob studied the camp. Something felt wrong. The men weren't being careful. No lookout, no one watching the perimeter. Either they were incredibly stupid or incredibly confident. We should wait, Jacob said. Monroe frowned. For what? Something's off. You're paranoid. Maybe, but I'm also alive. Monroe stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. Fine. We wait until they're asleep. Then we move in. They settled in to watch. The gang ate, drank, told stories Jacob couldn't hear. One by one, they rolled into their bedrolls. Within an hour, the camp was quiet except for the crackle of the dying fire. Monroe rose, drawing his pistol. Hayes and Daniels followed suit. Jacob checked his rifle one last time, then they moved. They were halfway across the clearing when the shooting started. Gunfire erupted from the rocks above. Bullets kicked up dirt at Jacob's feet. He dove behind a log as one of the gang members rolled out of his bedroll with a rifle already in his hands. It was an ambush. They'd been waiting. Monroe went down first, a bullet catching him in the shoulder. He fell hard, cursing. Hayes returned fire, his pistol barking in the darkness. One of the gang members dropped. Then another. But there were more than 4. Jacob counted at least 6 muzzle flashes in the rocks above. Daniels panicked. He broke cover, running for the horses. A bullet caught him in the back. He stumbled, fell, didn't get up. Jacob's mind went cold and clear. He'd been in situations like this before. When your options were fight or die, you fought. He picked his targets carefully, breathed, squeezed the trigger. A man in the rocks screamed and fell. Jacob moved, changing position before they could zero in on his muzzle flash. Another shot, another man down. Hayes was holding his own on the far side of the clearing, but Monroe was bleeding badly, trying to drag himself behind cover. Jacob made a decision. He broke from cover, running low and fast. Bullets whined past his head. He grabbed Monroe by the collar and hauled him behind a boulder. "Can you shoot?" Jacob asked. Monroe's face was pale, slick with sweat. "Yeah." "Then do it." Jacob reloaded and fired again. The gang was starting to retreat, realizing they'd lost the advantage. One of them shouted something Jacob couldn't make out. Then they were gone, melting into the rocks like ghosts. The silence that followed was deafening. Jacob stayed behind the boulder, listening. Nothing but the wind and the sound of Monroe's labored breathing. "Hayes!" Jacob called. "Here!" Hayes emerged from the shadows, limping slightly. "I'm hit. Not bad, just grazed." Jacob checked on Daniels. The young man was dead, eyes staring at nothing. Jacob closed them gently. "We need to move," Hayes said. "They'll regroup." "Can Monroe ride?" "I can ride," Monroe said through gritted teeth. "Just get me to my horse." They made it back to the horses. Jacob helped Monroe into the saddle while Hayes kept watch. Then they rode. Hard and fast, not stopping until they were miles away. They found a cave just before midnight. Jacob built a small fire while Hayes tended to Monroe's wound. The bullet had gone clean through, which was lucky. But Monroe had lost a lot of blood. "How many do you think are left?" Hayes asked. 3, maybe 4. Jacob poked at the fire. "They knew we were coming." "How?" "I don't know, but someone tipped them off." Monroe coughed, his face gray. "Doesn't matter now. We got 2 of them. That's $100. "Daniels is dead." "Yeah. Well, that's the risk." Jacob looked at him. "You knew it was an ambush." Monroe didn't deny it. "I had a suspicion." "And you didn't say anything." "Would it have changed anything?" Jacob wanted to hit him. But Monroe was already half dead, and besides, he was right. It wouldn't have changed anything. They spent the night in the cave. Jacob took first watch, sitting at the entrance with his rifle across his knees. The stars were bright and cold above him. He thought about May, wondered if she was sleeping, wondered if she was safe. He'd promised her he'd come back. Now he wasn't sure he could keep that promise. Morning came with frost on the ground and pain in every muscle. Monroe's wound had stopped bleeding, but he was feverish. Hayes looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. "We need to get him to a doctor," Hayes said. Jacob nodded. "Broken Ridge is 2 days' ride. Think he'll make it?" "I don't know." They started back, moving as fast as Monroe's condition allowed. By midday, he was delirious, mumbling about his wife and kids. Jacob had to tie him to his saddle to keep him from falling off. That night, they camped by a stream. Jacob changed Monroe's bandages while Hayes boiled water for coffee. The wound was infected, red and angry. Without proper medicine, Monroe would be dead in days. "We're not going to make it back in time," Hayes said quietly. Jacob knew he was right, but he didn't say it out loud. They rode through the next day and into the night. Monroe slipped in and out of consciousness. Once he grabbed Jacob's arm with surprising strength. "My share," he rasped. "Give it to my wife. She's in Carson City." "You can give it to her yourself," Jacob said. Monroe smiled faintly. Liar. He died just before dawn, slumping forward in the saddle. Hayes caught him before he fell. They buried him in a shallow grave marked with rocks. Jacob said a few words, though he wasn't sure Monroe would have appreciated them. Then they took his share of the bounty and kept riding. Broken Ridge appeared on the horizon late the next afternoon. Jacob had never been so relieved to see the shabby buildings and dusty streets. Hayes split off to see a doctor about his leg. Jacob went straight to the saloon. Frank looked up when he walked in. "You look like hell." "I feel worse." Jacob dropped the saddlebags on the bar. "Where's May?" "Kitchen. She's been worried sick." Jacob headed for the back. May was washing dishes, her sleeves rolled up, her hair tied back. She turned when she heard footsteps, and her eyes went wide. "Jacob!" He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She clung to him, her whole body shaking. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. "I'm here. I'm alive." She pulled back, her hands running over his chest, his arms, like she needed to make sure he was real. "You're hurt." "Just bruises." "Don't lie to me." Jacob smiled faintly. "All right, I'm hurt, but nothing that won't heal." May's eyes filled with tears. "I was so scared." "I know. I'm sorry." She hit him, hard, right in the chest. "And don't ever do that to me again, okay?" "I mean it, Jacob." "I know." She hit him again, then collapsed against him, sobbing. Jacob held her, resting his chin on top of her head. "Did you get the money?" she asked finally. "Yeah, $100. It's not all we need, but it's something." May pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Monroe?" "Dead." Her expression softened. "I'm sorry." Jacob shrugged. He knew the risks. They stood there in silence for a moment. Then May took his hand. "Come on. You need rest." She led him upstairs to her room and made him lie down. He tried to argue, but exhaustion won. Within minutes, he was asleep. He woke hours later to find May sitting beside the bed, watching him. "How long was I out?" he asked. 5 hours. Jacob sat up, wincing. His ribs ached, and his shoulder felt like it had been hit with a hammer. "I need to talk to Frank. Figure out what we do next." "Later. Right now you need to eat." She left and returned with a bowl of stew. Jacob ate mechanically, barely tasting it. His mind was already moving ahead, calculating. They had $163 now, still not enough. They needed another 37, and they had less than 4 weeks. "We're going to make it," May said, reading his thoughts. "How?" "I don't know, but we will." Jacob wanted to believe her, but the numbers didn't lie. The next few days passed in a blur. Jacob took every job he could find, no matter how backbreaking or degrading. May did the same. They barely saw each other except in passing. A quick kiss in the hallway. A stolen moment before bed. It wasn't enough, but it was all they had. 2 weeks before Garrett was due to return, they were still $20 short. Jacob was sitting in the saloon, staring at the pile of money on the table, when Frank sat down across from him. "You're not going to make it," Frank said. "I know." Frank drummed his fingers on the table. "There might be another way." Jacob looked up. "What way?" "There's a poker game tomorrow night. High stakes. Winner takes all." "I don't gamble." "You do now." Frank slid a small leather pouch across the table. "That's $50. My savings. You lose it, I'll kill you. But if you win..." Jacob stared at the pouch. "Why are you doing this?" Frank shrugged. "Because May's a good worker. And because I've seen the way you look at her. Reminds me of how I used to look at my wife." His expression darkened. "Before she died." Jacob picked up the pouch. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Just win." The poker game was held in a back room at the boarding house. 6 men sat around a table, each with a pile of chips in front of them. The air was thick with cigar smoke and tension. Jacob had played poker before, but never with stakes this high. His palms were sweating as he sat down. The first few hands went badly. Jacob lost $20 in the first hour. But then his luck turned. He won a big pot, then another. By midnight, he was up $60. The other players started dropping out. By 2 in the morning, it was just Jacob and one other man, a stranger with cold eyes and steady hands. The final hand came down to a pair of kings against a possible flush. Jacob watched the man's face, looking for a tell. There. A slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. Jacob pushed all his chips into the center. "All in." The man hesitated, Then he folded. Jacob won. He walked out of that room with $210. More than enough. He went straight to May's room and woke her up. "We did it," he said. She sat up, confused. "What?" "We have the money. All of it." May's eyes widened. "How?" "Poker." She stared at him for a moment, then started laughing. Not the polite laugh she gave customers. A real laugh, full and unguarded. Jacob found himself laughing too. Then May was in his arms and they were kissing, and for the first time in weeks, Jacob felt like they might actually survive this. 3 days later, Garrett rode back into town. Jacob was waiting for him in the street. He had the money in a leather satchel, $200 exactly. Garrett dismounted, his expression unreadable. "You got it?" Jacob tossed him the satchel. Garrett opened it, counted the bills, then nodded. "We're square," he said. "We're done," Jacob corrected. Garrett smiled faintly. "For now. Forever. The debt's paid. She's free." "The debt's paid, but people like her, they always end up owing someone." Garrett mounted his horse. "See you around, Terrell." He rode off with his men, and Jacob stood there watching until they disappeared. It was over. They were safe. Jacob turned and saw May standing in the doorway of the saloon. She was smiling, really smiling. He walked to her and took her hand. "Let's go home." She looked up at him. "Where's home?" Jacob thought about it. "Wherever you are." May squeezed his hand. "Then let's go." They walked down the street together, side by side, as the sun set over Broken Ridge. For the first time in years, Jacob felt like he was walking toward something instead of running away. But the peace didn't last. 2 weeks later, Jacob was in the livery stable when he heard shouting. He ran outside to find a crowd gathered in the street. In the center stood Calhoun, his face twisted with rage. "You think you can make a fool of me?" Calhoun was yelling at May, who stood perfectly still, her expression blank. "You think I don't know it was you who told Frank to lie?" Jacob pushed through the crowd. "That's enough, Calhoun." Calhoun whirled on him. "This doesn't concern you." Everything concerning her concerns me." Calhoun's eyes narrowed. "You two think you're so special, think you can just live your life like normal people." He spat at May's feet. "But you're not normal. You're a whore and a coward, and he's a fool." Jacob's fist connected with Calhoun's jaw before he'd even realized he was moving. Calhoun went down hard, blood streaming from his split lip. He staggered to his feet, reaching for his gun. Jacob drew faster. The shot echoed through the street. Calhoun's gun fell from his hand. He clutched his shoulder, his face going pale. "Next time I won't miss," Jacob said quietly. Calhoun stumbled backward, then turned and ran. The crowd dispersed slowly. Jacob holstered his gun and turned to May. She was staring at him, her face unreadable. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "He was going to shoot me." "Maybe, but now you've made an enemy for life." Jacob took her hand. "I don't care." "Well, you should." But Jacob was done caring about what other people thought, done letting fear dictate his choices. He'd spent 3 years running from his past. Now he was ready to fight for his future. That night, lying in bed with May in his arms, Jacob finally felt at peace. It wouldn't last. He knew that. Men like Calhoun didn't forget, and the world was still harsh and unforgiving. But for now, in this moment, he had everything he needed. May stirred beside him. "Jacob?" "Yeah?" "Do you think we'll ever have a real home? Somewhere we don't have to fight every day just to survive?" Jacob thought about it. "I don't know. Maybe." "That's not very reassuring." He smiled in the darkness. "I know, but it's honest." May was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think we will. I think we'll find a place where we belong, together." "Yeah?" "Yeah." Jacob held her tighter. "I hope you're right." "I am." Her voice was firm. "We've come too far to give up now." Jacob closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of her hair. She was right. They had come too far, survived too much, and he'd be damned if he let anyone take that away from them. Outside, the wind howled through the streets of Broken Ridge, but inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Jacob and May were finally home. Morning came with a knock on the door that made Jacob's hand instinctively reach for his knife. May stirred beside him, her eyes opening slowly. "Jacob Terrell." The voice was familiar. Frank. Jacob pulled on his trousers and opened the door. Frank stood there, his face grim. What is it? Calhoun's gone to the marshal. Says you shot him without provocation. Says he's pressing charges. Jacob's stomach dropped. There were witnesses. They saw him draw first. Yeah, well, the marshal's in Calhoun's pocket. Has been for years. Frank rubbed his face. He's coming for you. Today, probably. You need to decide what you're going to do. May appeared beside Jacob, pulling a shawl around her shoulders. What are our options? Frank looked at her, then at Jacob. Run, fight, or turn yourself in and hope for a trial that'll probably hang you anyway. I'm not running, Jacob said. Then you're a fool. Maybe. Jacob reached for his shirt. But I'm done running from things. Frank shook his head. Your funeral. After Frank left, Jacob sat on the edge of the bed, lacing up his boots. May sat beside him, her hand on his back. We could leave, she said quietly. Right now. Take the horses and go. Where? Anywhere. California, Mexico. It doesn't matter. Jacob turned to look at her. You really want to spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder? Better than watching you hang. I'm not going to hang. You don't know that. Jacob took her hand. If we run now, we'll always be running. Every town, every stranger will wonder if they're coming for us. That's not a life, May. That's just a slower kind of dying. May's eyes filled with tears. I can't lose you. You won't. Stop saying that like you can control it. Jacob pulled her close. I'm not going to let them take me, I promise. She didn't respond, just buried her face in his shoulder. The marshal arrived 2 hours later with 3 deputies. Jacob was in the saloon, sitting at his usual table with his rifle leaned against the wall beside him. May was in the kitchen, but he'd told her to stay there no matter what happened. The marshal was a big man, gone to fat but still dangerous. His name was Porter, and he had eyes like a snake. Jacob Terrill, Porter said, his hand resting on his gun. I'm placing you under arrest for the attempted murder of Thomas Calhoun. Jacob didn't move. It was self-defense. He drew first. That's not what he says. Then he's lying. Porter smiled without humor. You can tell that to the judge. Now stand up and put your hands where I can see them. Jacob stayed seated. I'm not going anywhere. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'm not the one making it hard. You know damn well Calhoun drew first. Half the town saw it. Half the town's too scared to testify against him. Porter took a step forward. Last chance, Terrill. Come peacefully or we drag you. Jacob's hand moved to his rifle. The deputies drew their guns. Don't, Porter warned. The standoff stretched. Jacob could feel his heart pounding, could taste copper in his mouth. He was fast, but not fast enough to take all 4 of them. If he tried, he'd die right here. Then May walked out of the kitchen. Stop! Every head turned. She stood there with her chin up, her hands steady at her sides. This doesn't concern you, woman, Porter said. Yes, it does. May walked to Jacob's table. I saw what happened. Calhoun threatened him. He drew his gun first. Jacob defended himself. Porter's expression didn't change. You willing to testify to that? Yes. Your word won't mean much in court. Then get the others to testify. Frank was there. Mrs. Kemp, 6 other people. Porter considered this. Calhoun says they're lying, says you all have it out for him. Calhoun's a bully and a liar, May said. Everyone in this town knows it. The only reason people don't stand up to him is because men like you protect him. Porter's jaw tightened. Watch your mouth. Or what? You'll arrest me too? May stepped closer. Go ahead, arrest both of us. See how that plays in front of a jury. Porter stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to his deputies. Put the guns away. The deputies hesitated, then holstered their weapons. Porter looked at Jacob. You're lucky she's got more sense than you do, but this isn't over. Calhoun wants his day in court. He'll get it. Trial's set for 2 weeks from today. You don't show up, I'll hunt you down myself. I'll be there, Jacob said. Porter tipped his hat with mock politeness. See that you are. He left with his deputies. The moment they were gone, Jacob let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. May sat down across from him, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. That was stupid, Jacob said. Probably. You could have gotten yourself arrested. So could you. She looked at him. We're in this together, remember? Jacob reached across the table and took her hand. Yeah, together. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Jacob's life. He and May spent their days preparing for the trial, tracking down witnesses, trying to get people to agree to testify. Most were reluctant. Calhoun had friends, and those friends had long memories. But slowly, they built a case. Frank agreed to testify. So did Mrs. Kemp, a miner named Sullivan who'd been passing by that day. Even Hayes, who'd recovered from his leg wound, offered to speak on Jacob's behalf. Still, Jacob knew it might not be enough. The judge was an old man named Blackwell, who'd been in the territory longer than anyone could remember. He was fair, mostly, but he was also practical. If he thought convicting Jacob would prevent more violence, he'd do it without hesitation. The night before the trial, Jacob couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling while May slept beside him. His mind kept running through scenarios, each one worse than the last. You're thinking too loud, May murmured. Jacob turned to look at her. Sorry. She opened her eyes. What are you thinking about? What happens if I lose? You won't. May, you won't, she said firmly. Because the truth is on our side, and because I won't let them take you. Jacob smiled faintly. You going to fight off the marshal and his deputies? If I have to? He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. What did I do to deserve you? You helped a stranger when no one else would. You risked everything for someone you barely knew. She looked up at him. You showed me that not all men are cowards or bullies. That's worth everything. Jacob didn't know what to say to that, so he just held her until they both fell asleep. The trial took place in the town hall, a cramped building that smelled like dust and old wood. Every seat was filled. People had come from miles around to watch, some out of genuine interest, others just for the spectacle. Jacob sat at a table in the front with Hayes beside him. Hayes had offered to speak as a character witness, and though Jacob had initially refused, he'd eventually accepted. He needed all the help he could get. Across the aisle sat Calhoun, his arm in a sling, his face smug. His lawyer was a sharp-faced man from Carson City who looked like he'd never lost a case. Judge Blackwell entered, and everyone stood. He was older than Jacob had expected, white-haired and stooped, but his eyes were sharp. Be seated, Blackwell said. Let's get this over with. The prosecution went first. Calhoun's lawyer painted Jacob as a violent drifter with a history of trouble. He brought up the incident at the supply wagon, the altercation outside the general store, made it sound like Jacob had been looking for a fight from the moment he arrived in Broken Ridge. Then Calhoun took the stand. I was just walking down the street, Calhoun said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. Minding my own business. Next thing I know, Terrell's in my face, accusing me of things I didn't do. I tried to walk away, but he wouldn't let me. Then he pulled his gun and shot me. Did you draw your weapon? The lawyer asked. No, sir. I didn't have time. It was a lie, and everyone in the room knew it. But Calhoun sold it well. When it was Jacob's turn, Hayes stood and called Frank to the stand. Frank looked uncomfortable in his Sunday clothes, but his testimony was solid. Calhoun drew first. I saw it clear as day. He was drunk and angry, and he went for his gun. Jacob just defended himself. The prosecution tried to shake his story, but Frank held firm. Mrs. Kemp testified next, then Sullivan. Each one backed up Jacob's version of events. By the time May took the stand, the room was buzzing. May sat straight-backed in the witness chair, her hands folded in her lap. She looked small and out of place, but her voice was steady. Tell us what you saw, Hayes said. Calhoun confronted me in the street. He was angry about something that had happened weeks ago. He started yelling, saying things I won't repeat. Jacob stepped in to stop him. Calhoun reached for his gun first. Jacob shot him to protect himself and me. Calhoun's lawyer stood. Miss Lynn, isn't it true that you and Mr. Terrell are involved romantically? May's expression didn't change. Yes. So you'd say anything to protect him? No, I'd tell the truth to protect him. There's a difference. Is there? Or are you just a woman in love, willing to lie for her man? May's eyes flashed. I don't lie, and I don't need to. The truth is enough. The lawyer smirked. The truth according to you. The truth according to a dozen witnesses who all saw the same thing. May leaned forward. You can twist the facts all you want, but everyone in this room knows what really happened. Calhoun is a bully who's used to getting his way. This time, he didn't. That's what this trial is really about. The lawyer opened his mouth, then closed it. He sat down. Judge Blackwell leaned back in his chair. Anything else? Hayes stood. The defense rests, Your Honor. Blackwell looked at Calhoun's lawyer. You? The prosecution rests. Blackwell nodded. I'll render my verdict in the morning. Court's adjourned. That night, Jacob and May walked along the edge of town. The stars were out, bright and cold. May had her arm looped through his, and they walked in silence for a long time. Do you think we won? May asked. I don't know. That's not what I wanted to hear. Jacob stopped, turning to face her. I think we told the truth. I think people heard it, but I also know that truth doesn't always win. May looked down. I'm scared. So am I. What happens if Blackwell rules against you? Jacob had been thinking about that all day. Then I run, and you come with me. Jacob, I'm serious, May. I'm not going to jail. I'm not going to hang. If it comes to that, we leave tonight and never look back. May searched his face. And if I say no, then I go alone. But I'd rather have you with me. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. All right. If it comes to that, we run. They walked back to town holding hands, both knowing that tomorrow would change everything. The verdict came at 10 in the morning. The town hall was packed again. Jacob sat at his table, his leg bouncing nervously. May sat behind him in the gallery, her face pale but composed. Judge Blackwell entered and took his seat. The room fell silent. I've reviewed the testimony, Blackwell said, and I've considered the evidence. This case comes down to one question. Who drew first? Mr. Calhoun says it was Mr. Terrill. Multiple witnesses say it was Mr. Calhoun. He paused. In cases like this, I have to weigh credibility. And frankly, Mr. Calhoun, your credibility is lacking. Calhoun's face went red. Multiple witnesses corroborate Mr. Terrill's account. All of them independent, all of them consistent. I find it highly unlikely they're all lying. Blackwell looked at Jacob. Mr. Terrill, I find you not guilty of attempted murder. You're free to go. The room erupted. Jacob sat frozen, unable to believe it. Then May was beside him, her arms around his neck, and he realized it was real. They'd won. Calhoun stormed out, his face twisted with rage. His lawyer followed, looking disgusted. But Jacob didn't care. He was free. Outside, people congratulated him. Frank clapped him on the shoulder. Mrs. Kemp hugged May. Hayes shook Jacob's hand. You did good, Terrill, Hayes said. We all did. Hayes nodded. What are you going to do now? Jacob looked at May. I don't know. Figure it out as we go, I guess. Hayes smiled. Good luck. Over the next few weeks, Jacob and May started building something that resembled a normal life. Jacob picked up steady work at a ranch 10 miles out. The pay was decent, and the rancher didn't ask questions. May kept her job at the saloon, but she started talking about opening her own restaurant someday. A small place, nothing fancy, but hers. They moved into a small cabin on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, one room, a leaky roof, a stove that barely worked. But it was theirs. Jacob spent his evenings fixing the place up while May cooked, and they talked about the future. It should have been perfect. But Jacob could feel something coming, a storm on the horizon he couldn't quite see. It arrived on a Tuesday. Jacob was in town picking up supplies when he saw the horse, black, with a white blaze on its forehead. He'd seen that horse before, in the hills when Monroe had died. His blood ran cold. He found the rider outside the saloon. It was one of Garrett's men, the one with the scar on his nose. What are you doing here? Jacob asked. The man turned, grinning. Terrill, been a while. The debt's paid. You got no business here. See, that's where you're wrong. The man pulled out a piece of paper. This here's a new contract. Turns out May's husband borrowed more than we thought. Another $500. With interest, that's $800 total. Jacob's vision went red. That's a lie. Maybe, but it's a legal lie, signed and notarized. The man folded the paper. Garrett says she's got 2 weeks to pay, or we take her back to San Francisco. Over my dead body. The man's grin widened. That can be arranged. Jacob's hand moved to his gun, but the man was faster. He had his pistol out and aimed before Jacob could draw. Easy, cowboy. I'm just the messenger. He backed toward his horse. 2 weeks. Tell her to be ready. Then he was gone, riding out of town in a cloud of dust. Jacob stood there, his hands shaking with rage. He'd known it was too good to be true. Men like Garrett didn't just walk away. They waited. They schemed. And then they came back for what they wanted. He went home and told May everything. She listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each word. $800, she said when he finished. We don't have that kind of money. I know. And even if we did, they'd just come back with another debt, another contract. They'll never stop. Jacob nodded. So we don't pay. Then what do we do? Jacob thought about it. There was only one real option, and it was the one he'd been avoiding since the day he met her. We leave, he said. Tonight. Pack what we can carry and go. May looked around the cabin, at the table Jacob had built, the curtains she'd sewn, the little touches they'd added to make it feel like home. I don't want to run anymore, she said quietly. Neither do I, but what choice do we have? May was silent for a long moment. Then she looked at him. We fight. Fight? May, there's 4 of them, maybe more. We can try. Her voice was firm. I'm tired of letting men like Garrett control my life. I'm tired of being afraid. If we run now, we'll run forever. You said that yourself. Jacob wanted to argue, wanted to tell her it was suicide. But looking at her face, he knew she was right. They'd spent their whole lives running from things. Maybe it was time to stand and fight. All right, he said. We fight, but we do it smart. They spent the next week preparing. Jacob reached out to everyone who owed him a favor. Hayes agreed to help. So did Frank and Sullivan. Even old Otis from the livery said he'd lend a hand. They weren't an army, but they were enough. The plan was simple. When Garrett and his men came back, they'd find a town ready to fight, not just for May, but for the principle of it. Because if Garrett could come in and take whoever he wanted, none of them were safe. Jacob set up positions around the town, Hayes and Sullivan on the rooftops with rifles, Frank in the saloon with a shotgun, Otis at the livery with his old cavalry pistol. May wanted to fight too, but Jacob made her promise to stay in the cabin. If things went wrong, she was to run. No arguments. Garrett arrived on the 13th day. He rode in with 6 men this time, all of them armed to the teeth. They stopped in the middle of the street and dismounted. May Lynn, Garrett called. Come out. Time to settle up. Jacob stepped out of the saloon. She's not coming. Garrett's expression didn't change. That's not your decision. Yeah, it is. You gonna stop me, Terrell? If I have to. Garrett looked around, noticing the empty street, the closed doors, the eerie silence. Where is everyone? Around? Garrett's eyes narrowed. You're bluffing. Try me. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Garrett nodded to his men. Spread out. Find her. That's when the shooting started. Hayes fired first, his bullet kicking up dust at the feet of Garrett's closest man. Sullivan fired next, hitting another man in the shoulder. Frank emerged from the saloon with his shotgun, and Otis appeared from the livery. Garrett's men scattered, looking for cover. But there wasn't much. Jacob had made sure of that. Stand down, Garrett shouted. Before someone gets killed. That's up to you, Jacob called back. Garrett's face twisted with rage. He drew his gun and aimed at Jacob. Jacob drew faster. The bullet hit Garrett in the chest. He stumbled backward, shock written across his face. Then he fell. The other men froze, looking at their fallen leader. Then, one by one, they raised their hands. We're done, one of them said. The contract died with Garrett. You sure about that? Jacob kept his gun trained on them. We don't get paid enough to die for a dead man's grudge. The man gestured to the others. We're leaving, and we're not coming back. Jacob watched as they mounted their horses and rode out of town. He didn't lower his gun until they were out of sight. Then the adrenaline hit, and his hands started shaking. May ran out of the cabin and straight into his arms. She was crying and laughing at the same time, and Jacob held her so tight he was afraid he might break her. It's over, he whispered. It's really over. She pulled back, cupping his face in her hands. We did it. We actually did it. Jacob kissed her, not caring who saw. When they finally pulled apart, The whole town was watching. Some were smiling, others looked shell-shocked, but they were all alive. Frank walked over, his shotgun slung over his shoulder. "Hell of a thing, Terrell." "Yeah." "You know they're going to send more, right? Eventually." Jacob shook his head. "I don't think so. Garrett's dead. The contract's gone. And even if they wanted to, I don't think they'll risk coming back here. Not after today." Frank considered this, then nodded. "Maybe you're right." Over the next few months, life in Broken Ridge settled into something Jacob had never experienced before. Peace. He and May fixed up the cabin properly, added a second room, built a porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. May saved enough money to open her restaurant. It was small, just 4 tables, but it was hers. She served food that reminded her of home, mixed with things she'd learned in America. People came from miles around to eat there. Jacob kept working at the ranch, but he also started helping the town in other ways, fixing things that broke, settling disputes before they turned violent. He never wanted to be a hero, but somehow that's what he'd become. One evening, about a year after Garrett's death, Jacob and May sat on their porch watching the stars come out. May rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked. "Sometimes." "Do you?" "Sometimes." She paused. "But then I remember what we built here, what we fought for. And I think maybe this is where we're supposed to be, Batafotam." Jacob kissed the top of her head. "Yeah, I think so too." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then May spoke again. "I'm pregnant." Jacob's breath caught. "What?" She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "I found out yesterday. I wanted to wait to tell you, but I couldn't." Jacob didn't know what to say. He'd never thought about being a father, never thought he'd live long enough to have that choice. "Are you happy?" May asked, suddenly uncertain. Jacob pulled her into his arms. "I'm terrified, and I'm the happiest I've ever been in my life." May laughed, the sound bright and free. "Me too." 7 months later, their daughter was born. They named her Rose, after May's mother. She had Jacob's gray eyes and May's dark hair, and she screamed loud enough to wake the dead. Jacob held her for the first time and felt something crack open in his chest. All the walls he'd built, all the armor he'd worn, it fell away. He was vulnerable in a way he'd never been before, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of it. May recovered slowly. Childbirth had been hard, and there were nights when Jacob sat up watching her sleep, terrified she wouldn't wake up. But she did. She always did. As Rose grew, the cabin filled with noise and laughter. Jacob built a crib, then a cradle, then eventually a small bed. May sewed clothes and sang lullabies in Chinese that Jacob didn't understand but loved anyway. The town accepted them in ways Jacob had never expected. People stopped staring, stopped whispering. Rose played with the other children, and no one seemed to care that she looked different. It wasn't perfect. There were still people who muttered under their breath. Still moments when May would come home with tears in her eyes from something someone had said. But they were fewer now. And when they happened, Jacob was always there. One night, when Rose was 3 years old, she fell asleep between them in the big bed. Jacob looked at his 2 girls, his whole world, and felt a contentment he'd never thought possible. "What are you thinking?" May asked. Jacob smiled. "I'm thinking about how far we've come, about how we almost didn't make it." "But we did." "Yeah, we did." May reached across Rose's sleeping form and took his hand. "Do you have any regrets?" Jacob thought about it, about Daniel, about the man he'd killed, about all the years he'd spent running. "No," he said finally, "because all of it led me here. To you, to her. And I wouldn't trade that for anything." May squeezed his hand. "Neither would I." Years passed. Rose grew into a smart, stubborn girl who had her mother's determination and her father's quiet strength. May's restaurant became the most popular place in town. Jacob became the man people came to when they had problems they couldn't solve. They weren't rich. They weren't famous. But they had something better. They had each other. And they had a home. One evening, when Jacob was 45 and May was 43, they sat on their porch watching Rose play in the yard. She was chasing fireflies, her laughter ringing out in the dusk. She's beautiful, May said. She looks like you. She has your stubbornness. Jacob laughed. That's all you. May leaned against him. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd never met? All the time. What do you think? Jacob considered it. I think I'd still be that angry, broken man who didn't know how to live. And you'd still be running, always looking over your shoulder. And now? Jacob looked at his wife, then at his daughter. Now we're home. May smiled. Yeah, we are. As the sun set over Broken Ridge, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jacob Terrell realized something he'd never thought possible. He was happy. Not the fleeting happiness that comes and goes, but the deep, bone-deep contentment of a life well lived. He'd been a lone cowboy once, hardened by loss and violence. She'd been a woman alone, carrying grief too heavy for one person to bear. Together, they'd built something neither could have built alone. They'd found love in a harsh land, found hope in the darkest moments, found home in each other. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.